It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You can sign up for free, get yourself a free audiobook. Also, if you like today's show, if this is the first time you're hearing the show, go to OppermanReport.com. It's our website, and you can see the list of all the stations that carry our show. And then we have a members section where you can sign up and join up and get special content all kinds of great new content on OppermanReport.com. Now today, we got a real treat. Okay, we have Margaret Randall, who's a fascinating woman, and she's an activist, a poet, a writer, an artist, and a real a gem. You know, a delightful woman. I just talked to her for a couple of seconds. She's written over 120 books, and I've always wanted to do a good show on Che Guevara. We used to play some songs about Che Guevara during the breaks back in the old days. Can't do that anymore. Can't play music anymore on the station. And I've always wanted a really good guest on Che Guevara, and I think we really got one. She's actually lived in Cuba, and she's met Che's relatives. She becomes friends with their relatives, and a real fascinating woman. Margaret, are you there?
Yes, I am, Ed. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you so much for coming on. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying I'm a woman who grew up in the 50s, who was born in 36, so I sort of came of age during McCarthyism and that era, and then was fortunate enough to branch out, go to New York, go to Mexico, where I spent 8 years, go to Cuba, where, as you say, I lived for 11 years, and then on to Nicaragua, and finally come back to the United States in 84. I'm a poet, a writer. I have been an activist. I don't consider myself so much one at 78, but I still write all the time. I translate. And my connection to Cuba is a very close one, a very alive one. I've been back many times since living there, most recently in April of this year. And, watching what the revolution has done and is still doing is one of my fascinations.
My mother was born in Cuba, and my mother's 78.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's just really touches my heart when I hear you say this. So what is your impression of the revolution today?
Well, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the revolution has been lost over the years for multiple reasons. I'm not one of these people who whitewashes the Cuban Revolution or who denigrates it. I think the Cubans have done an extraordinary job in preserving a lot of things, a lot of revolutionary initiatives, such as universal health care and education and many elements of justice. But of course, we know that not only the blockade, the U.S. blockade that is still in effect despite the renewal of relations in December of last year, and many errors that the Cubans themselves have made have stood in the way of, maybe realizing the full potential of that revolution. Still, I think that when I think of Cuba, I just think that the fact that it still exists, the fact that the revolution still exists is to the extraordinary credit of a fantastic people.
So true. There's nothing like the Cuban people. There really isn't. I've never met anyone like my crazy Cuban family. These intense, passionate people. And wonderful in so many ways. Such hardworking, wonderful people with such extreme beliefs and views.
Yeah, and creative and resilient and all sorts of things. I mean, you're right. The Cubans are extraordinary.
It really is. It's an amazing culture. It's amazing people. So give us an idea, a little history, because we really brought you on to discuss your book, Che on My Mind, and you have an upcoming event, a symposium coming up here at UCLA on October 17th that I suppose anybody could attend if they wanted to come and see you there, right?
Oh, I think so, yes. I think it's open to the public. And it's not my symposium. I should clarify that I'm one of the invited guests, but there are many invited guests. David Kunsel, who's a great authority on Che, is sponsoring it and has organized it. So I think it's going to be an interesting event. If anyone's in that area and wants to drop by, I think it'll be worthwhile.
You know what, man? I'd love to go there myself. We'll have to keep in touch on that. So what can you tell us about the Cuban Revolution and Che Guevara?
Well, I mean, of course, as most people who know about Cuba know, Che, who was an Argentinian, a doctor, joined up with Fidel Castro in Mexico in the mid-50s and joined his group of revolutionaries, came to Cuba on the ill-fated Grandmaza, the leaky yacht that 80 of them came across from Mexico, from Tuxpan to the Cuban coast on. And few survived the landing. There were various guesstimates, 21, 12, 7, etc. But Fidel and Che and a few others did survive, went into the mountains and began to wage this war, which eventually culminated in January of 1959 with the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. So Che, during that war, became a comandante. He led one of the columns. He became one of the leaders of the revolution. Interesting because he wasn't a Cuban, and in some ways he was an outsider, but in other ways he really ingratiated himself and became Cuban in all the important ways. Che went on to be head of the National Bank for a while, to be Minister of Industry for a while, but his dream was always a dream of continental revolution, continental liberation. And so in the 60s, in the mid-60s, he left Cuba. He went to Congo and was part of a failed revolutionary experience there. And then came back to Cuba briefly, trained, and took a small group of men and women to Bolivia, where his intention was to build a revolutionary force that would be able to be important in the liberation of the continent. And as we know, that ended badly. In '67, he was murdered by Bolivians, but of course on the say-so of the CIA. And many people think that was the end of that. I don't happen to be one of them, and that was part of what motivated me to write this book, Che on My Mind.
Oh, so then how wasn't that the end of that? Tell us the rest.
Well, I think history is a little bit more complicated than these sort of rote interpretations. If we look at Latin America today, if we look at Bolivia, for example, which has a very progressive government, Evo Morales' government, many years have passed since Che's guerrilla, but I think that a line can be drawn, an important line from those years of Che's struggle, and even before that, of course, the Bolivarian actions, in the century before, and today. And I think that we can see how actually members of Che's guerrilla after his death continued. They also failed, but today one of the members of Evo Morales' government is the younger brother of a group of revolutionaries, the Pereiros, two of whom fought with Che. So there is a continuity there, and I think that history takes us through ups and downs, but there is a continuity, as I say, and I think that without Che's movement in Bolivia, we might not have Evo Morales.
Very interesting. You never hear that. Now what about? Do you think that the Bolivian action was always described as an unpopular with the Bolivian people? But do you think maybe it was more that the CIA by that time was more organized and active and able and still on a tear over their defeat in Cuba? That's what was the cause of the fail of the uprising there.
I think that basically the cause of the failure was bad logistics, bad materials. The CIA very strong in those years, but also I think it's important to distinguish between. I think it's too easy to say Bolivians weren't in favor of that. Some were, some weren't. I just read this morning a little bit of a very interesting book by Peter McLaren about Che and Paulo Freire, in which he mentions that in Valle Grande, the area where Che was murdered, peasants even today have a prayer to Che's soul, asking Che's soul, for example, to save a sick cow. So, I think there's a mystique, and I think there are people in Bolivia who very much appreciate Che, and others, of course, it's a class society, so others don't. But I think it's too simplistic to say that the people didn't. He didn't have support in the immediate area. That's absolutely true, and I think that was one of Che's failures, was that he went into an area where he didn't really know the culture, he didn't know the language. These were indigenous people who didn't even speak Spanish, who had their own languages, and so, I think that was an error, and I think when we look at Che, it's important to demystify him. There's this one level where, the T-shirts and the coffee mugs and so forth, and that it's commodity-oriented capitalism, but it also has a meaning for people, even people who don't understand who Che was. So that's one level, but if we want to go a little deeper, we have to look at the man. We have to look at him in all his humanity, with his brilliance, with his errors, with his, with all the aspects of his personality.
Very interesting. So why don't you describe some of his brilliance?
Well, he was an unusual human being. He was, first of all, and I put this out in my book because I think it's one of the most important things, he put his actions where his mouth was. He was a person who didn't just spew a line, he followed that line to death. So, I think that's quite unusual in today's world, that people be willing to stand up for what they believe in the way that he did. So that's one of his aspects that attracts me. He was also multifaceted in his reading and his study. He loved art. He loved languages. He loved math and science, astronomy, anthropology. He was widely read. He often carried books of poetry in his backpack in the guerrilla, occupying space that could have been used for weapons or for medicines. He was asthmatic. He was he needed his asthma medicine to survive. So those are aspects of him, of his life that interest me. He was a pure human being in the sense that he was, he believed in justice, he worked for justice, but he never asked of anyone anything that he wasn't willing to do himself. The problem for many people was that he was willing to do so much. There are infinite stories about his time in Cuba when he was at the head of the Ministry of Industry, and he expected people to work an 18, 20-hour day, and not everyone is capable of that. So he had those sort of superhuman qualities of energy and commitment that we don't often see also. It's hard just in an hour radio show to enumerate all his qualities. I don't think I even do it in the book, although I try. But he was a very interesting, unusual man who set goals that are incomprehensible to most of us, and was successful at least some of them.
You know that it's so true what you said. How he set goals that are incomprehensible to most of us. Like for this small little band of men to say, "Well, let's go back to Cuba and overthrow the government." You know, just like let's go to Bolivia, let's overthrow the government. Let's form an army from the ground up. You know, let's.
Right. I mean, it's just, and that brings us to another issue, which I dwell on to some extent in the book, which has always troubled me. I as you say, I lived in Cuba for 11 years. I raised my 4 children there. And you may or may not know, coming from a Cuban family, that in Cuba, every morning in every school, especially the little kids, they shout the slogan, "We will be like Che." Seremos como Che. And I remember in Cuba feeling a little troubled by that. I mean, not every kid can be like Che, and that kind of a slogan must do a lot of damage to kids who fear that they can't be or will never be. So, there's even in Cuba, there's that black and white assumptions about this man, along with great scholarship, of course. I mean, the Cubans probably have the most complete scholarship on Che that exists. But in the popular culture, there's always that sort of easy out, which is another thing that I try to talk about and deal with in my book, because my book is really a feminist appraisal of Che and his life. And as a feminist appraisal, it's an appraisal that first and foremost tries to deal with power, how power is used, how it's abused. So all of that interests me too.
So when you were living in Che, you said you met Che's family, and did you also meet Castro?
I did briefly. I wouldn't say that I know him. I mean, we had a couple of conversations in public. In terms of Che, I never met him. I got to Cuba just for the first time, just after he had been murdered. But I was close to several of his sisters and brothers. I met his sister Celia on my first trip to Cuba. On my second trip to Cuba, and I talk about that in the book because it elicited some quite humorous incidents, somewhere between humor and grief. It was just after his death. And then when I moved to Cuba for good at the end of 1969, and my children entered school, several of my children and several of his children were schoolmates. So I got to know them through my own children. And another person important in Che's life, who was a good friend of mine, was Che's first wife, Hilda Gadea. I met her before even going to Cuba. I met her in Mexico in '68, and we were good friends. So although I never knew Che personally, I did know many people in his family, and that was interesting to me at the moment of writing the book, because I could draw on those relationships and those memories.
Now, what about, you said he had children, and now what about his children? Did they feel an obligation to live up to the legend?
Well, I think they do, of course. Che had 5 recognized children. He had a daughter by his first wife who sadly died some years ago from cancer. She was an adult, but a young adult. And then he had 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, by his second wife, Aleda March. And all 4 of them are deeply committed to the revolution and involved in different ways through their commitment, and also through their the jobs that they hold, the careers that they followed. I have an interesting story. My most recent project, even after the book about Aide Santa Maria, which has just appeared from Duke, I just last week finished a huge anthology of Cuban poetry, 8 decades of Cuban poetry, which I selected and translated, wrote the introduction and the notes and so forth. Duke will also bring that out next year. And then researching the notes on the different poets, I discovered that one of the poets I included is also a son of Che's, unrecognized, although Che apparently provided his mother with money every month and so forth. And the poet himself doesn't ever try to draw on that relationship. I don't think that I know they never lived together and so forth. I don't think he even knew that he was Che's son until he was 15. But, so yes, Che, to try to shorten the answer, Che had a number of children, and as far as I know, they're all committed to the revolution.
Now, what made you move to Cuba? That's a pretty bold move.
It was actually a move out of necessity. I was involved in the Mexican student movement of 1968,
right,
like so many other people in Mexico at the time, and suffered a repression from the Mexican government as a result of that involvement, which was not a leadership involvement or anything, just as I say, like tens of thousands of people. And so I had to go underground in Mexico and figure out how to leave the country. And I had 4 small children by that time. They ranged in age from 8 to 3 months. So I eventually got out of Mexico underground and made my way to Cuba. And that was my reason for going to Cuba. And then, I stayed for 11 years. My children got their basic educations there. And those were extraordinary years for which I'm forever grateful, because they were years that changed my life, certainly, and were tremendous foundations for my children in terms of what they would later do in their lives.
Oh, what have they done later in their lives?
Well, my son lives in Uruguay. He's a professor, electrical engineering professor. His specialty is imaging. He was the vice president of the University of the Republic in Uruguay for the past 6 years. He's just stepped down from that position. But during those years, he and a group of people working with him opened 7 universities in the interior of the country. So he has used his education in Cuba in many different ways, wherever he's been. He's also written a terrific book published in Uruguay about his years in Cuba. My next child is my oldest daughter, Sara. She lives in Cholula, Mexico. She is also an engineer, chemical engineer, but she's never practiced except for a few years in Cuba. Her profession, she now teaches Kundalini yoga in Mexico. And it may be a little harder to trace her Cuban education to what she's doing now, but I think if you look a little closer, you can see that her initiative, her curiosity, her intellectual curiosity, and her courage in changing her profession in midlife, she's in her 50s, can be traced to Cuba. My next daughter, Jimena, is also lives in Mexico, but in Mexico City, and she too has embarked on new adventures at midlife. She's a chef. She's written a cookbook. She's now beginning to teach cooking classes in Mexico City. And then my youngest daughter, Anna, lives in Brooklyn, and she's also an amazing young woman, not so young anymore. She's in her mid-40s, but she's a producer, senior producer for Cristiano and Poor on CNN International. So she's also someone she came to the States at 14, not speaking any English, learned fast, got herself a scholarship to a great college and so forth and so on. So I think that when I look at my children, although they personally, individually, credit Cuba more or less, I mean, I think my son credits Cuba more than my daughter's does with influencing his life. But I think all of them show they're examples of people who never let bad times hold them back or tear them down. They sort of fought their way out of whatever obstacles happen to be in their way, and they all have very successful lives.
Oh, my God. I'm getting chills, when you started saying that, because I've been having this theme. Almost every guest I have on here, they're the same kind of people, like-minded people. And I always say, well, you've been up against all these struggles, you've been fighting, what do you think? And they almost always say, keep pushing forward. We just got to keep resisting. We got to keep pushing forward. And just at church this Sunday morning that just passed, we went to a brand new church, and the pastor started saying the same thing. We got to keep pushing forward. It's like pushing up that rock up the hill, pushing that snowball and building that snowball. Got to keep. So, and just to hear you say this, to work against adversity and struggle, is just so encouraging.
But, to push forward, to push that rock up the hill, you have to have something to push with. And, the world is getting to be a pretty inhospitable place for most people in terms of having that base that they need to push with. And so I think that, places like Cuba, where in the basic education, for example, creativity is stressed. Competition is not stressed. Emulation is stressed. Getting together with your peers and deciding on a goal and working together for that goal instead of against each other. Those are the kinds of values that I see in my children and also in my grandchildren that come, I think, very much from experiences like the Cuban Revolution.
So then would you encourage people to go and move to Cuba or to live in Cuba?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily encourage them to live in Cuba, to move to Cuba. I mean, I think people are needed everywhere, and I don't think the Cubans need a whole lot of North Americans moving down there at this point. But I would encourage people to go to Cuba, to visit Cuba, to see for themselves the good and the difficulties and the creativity and the resilience of these people who have stood up to the most voracious, destructive force in the world, which is the United States, for 56 years, and they're still there. I mean, I think we can learn from that. And they're also, as you mentioned at the beginning of the hour, they're a joyous people. They're loud and sing and dance and have a great sense of humor. So I think that it's important for people who live 90 miles away to experience that, be it for a week, 2 weeks, a month, not necessarily move there, but yes, find out.
Now, I've always thought that if the Cuban people could export their cigars to the United States and the rum and the sugar and even the other minerals like nickel and stuff you hear about, it would be the largest economy in the whole Caribbean.
Well, they have some things now that are even more important, and they have been exporting into the United States without it being publicized that much on either side. For example, their biochemical, their new medications. They discovered a medication in Cuba that brings down cholesterol. They have a whole biochemical industry that's very successful, that's rarely talked about in this country. They also produce human beings. I mean, when you think about Cuba and you think about Cuban internationalism, Cuba has, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of doctors and experts in different fields all over the world, working wherever there's a natural disaster, wherever they're invited. They have thousands of eye doctors, for example, doing free cataract removals in Latin America and in many other countries. So, those are things that I admire tremendously. The Cubans have so little, and they've had to contend with so many obstacles in terms of the trade embargo and so forth, and yet that kind of generosity is really spectacular.
Amazing. We're here with Margaret Randall. She's the author of Che on My Mind. She's also written a book just recently, just came out, called Haide Santa Maria. I don't have the rest of that title. Yes, I do. It's up there.
Cuban revolutionary. She led by transgression.
almost sounds like a romance novel, but but it's not.
It's not. It's not.
We're going to have you back on about that too. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Also, too, our guest, she has a symposium. It's not her symposium, but she's going to be speaking at the symposium coming up October 17th at UCLA in California. So check that out. We'll be right back after these messages with more of Margaret Randall. And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalane stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. We are here today with Margaret Randall discussing her book, Che on My Mind. Fascinating woman. Margaret, you talked about your time in Cuba, but also when you wanted to come back to the United States, you had a little trouble, didn't you?
I certainly did, yes.
So can you give us an idea of, first of all, what motivated you to want to come back?
Well, I was in my late 40s. I had lived 23 years in Latin America, 8 in Mexico and 11 in Cuba, and almost 4 in Nicaragua by that time. I was in midlife, and my parents were getting quite elderly, and I just had a desire to come home. I think that the fact that I'm a poet, I write in English, I've always written in English, that had something to do with it. I wanted to have a closer connection to my language of origin, and also a closer connection to my landscape of origin. I grew up in New Mexico, where I live today, and the landscape here, the desert, the mountains, the canyons, are very important to me and very prominent in my work. So it was a combination of all of those things that made me want to come home and spend some time with my family before it got to be too late for that. And my children were grown and basically on their own by that time. So those were the things that motivated my desire to return.
And it was the State Department that didn't want to let you back in?
Well, in 1967, living in Mexico and married to a Mexican citizen, I had unfortunately given up my U.S. citizenship, not intentionally. My intention was to preserve it, but in those days you couldn't have dual citizenship. And so in the act of taking out Mexican citizenship, which was a purely economic move, I needed to work to help support my family and so forth. It was easier to get a job as a Mexican and very easy to become a Mexican as the wife of a Mexican. And in that process, I relinquished, or my U.S. citizenship was taken away. So that years later, when I tried to return to the United States, when I did return, I was then a Mexican citizen, and the U.S. Was able then to point to opinions expressed in a number of my books and refuse me entrance under one of the clauses of McCarran-Walter. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the McCarran-Walter law. It's the Immigration and Nationality Act that was passed in 1952, actually over President Truman's veto. And it has a number of clauses. At that point, it had 34 of them. And one of them was called, in popular lingo, the ideological exclusion clause. That was the clause that they tried to keep me out under. And it basically said that, if you had certain opinions or you had association with socialist, communists, or were a member of a socialist or communist organization, which I wasn't, but, that's part of the clause, you can be kept out. Interestingly, it never barred anybody who was a fascist or had meaningful relationships with fascists, but it was in effect then, and my case lasted for almost 5 years, went through several instances where I kept losing, until I finally won at a level called the Court of Immigration Appeals in 1969, and I did win reinstatement of my citizenship. So those were hard years, but interesting ones.
And then you were awarded a grant from the Dashiell Hammett grant for writers victimized by political repression.
Right, yes. Very nice. Very nice recognition. And I had tremendous support from many, many thousands of people across this country. So, I'm still very grateful for that.
You've had some life. You've had some life. Now, but back to Che Guevara again. What about some of the criticisms, especially when you go online and you read some of the basic overviews? Mass murderer, firing squads, cold-hearted killer. What is your response to those kind of things?
Well, I don't shy away from those accusations in my book. I deal with them. It's easy for people to criticize. Che was, in fact, one of the officials in charge of the executions that took place after the Cuban Revolution. These were executions that were sought by the Cuban people. I mean, these were executions of torturers and murderers. As far as I've been able to research, he actually stopped many of them, but of course many did go through. But it wasn't that he was a mass murderer. It was that, that was the tenor of the times, and that was what the people of Cuba demanded after the war. I personally am absolutely against capital punishment, and I consider myself pretty much a pacifist today. So, I looked hard and long at those accusations. I think it's a mistake just to go online and look at the kinds of things that people say about other people, because they can say anything at all and get a hearing. But I personally don't find that Guevara was a particularly violent man. I think he was a committed revolutionary who believed that armed struggle was the only way to get justice for the peoples of the third world. And in that struggle, of course, in armed struggle, armed struggle is armed, so there's certainly violence there. Now, if we compare that violence with what's going on today in the Middle East, what the U.S. is doing with its drone strikes, and what ISIS is doing with its horrendous beheadings and so forth. There we're talking about violence that you can't really find a good side to. But I think that you have to look at Che's era in context historically, and I don't believe that he was. I believe that he was actually quite a humanist.
Gotcha. And these were extreme times. This was they were right there in the eye of the hurricane with the U.S. government, right off their shirt, Bay of Pigs, and trying to overthrow the revolution. And so many other covert and overt actions. People who talk about Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and others as being violent revolutionaries forget or want to forget that Fidel Castro was a lawyer, and Che Guevara was a doctor, and Castro tried a number of legal means for a number of years to change the situation in Cuba, the political situation. These are not people who started out with a gun in their hands. The gun came when the other methods failed. So I think that's something that people should remember. So what do you think of this, the opening up of the relations between Cuba and America right now? In general, I think it's a good thing. And I think it's a good thing because you can't isolate a people forever. I think that the Cubans need relations with the rest of the world. It's an island country, which makes it even more isolated. On the part of the United States, I think it was a brave move by Obama, although I do believe that it's more a change in methodology than in policy. I think the United States would still love to see regime change, as they term it, in Cuba, without really much respect or any respect for what the Cuban people want, or the fact that every country deserves to design the government that it thinks best for it. We can't go on imposing. The United States cannot go on imposing its form of capitalism forever all over the world. So I think it's more a change in methodology than in policy. But again, I think it's a good thing, and I think we need to see how it unfolds. I think the most important thing will be when and if, or if and when the trade embargo is ended, because that's really what has held the Cubans back economically. Now, we have some friends of the show here that are the original Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and they're concerned that in these negotiations that there could be a possibility that the Castro regime would turn over Assata Shakur back to the U.S. What do you think?
I don't think so. I've read that. I've heard that. And I can understand it as a legitimate concern, but I really don't think the Cubans are going to do that. The Cubans, as far as I've known them, have never really gone back on their commitments. And I think they have a commitment to Assata, and which I think that they will honor.
Okay, well, I would hope so. Oh, boy, okay. We're here with Margaret Randall. We're down to like the last 10, 15 minutes. What else would you like to tell us? What do you think we should really know about Che Guevara and about Cuba?
What should we be doing?
No, what should we be aware of? Oh, yeah, what are we even doing?
I think, Cuba is of great interest to people in this country. The United States is more and more every day a country of predominantly Hispanic origin. In not too many years, the majority of our population will be of Hispanic origin. So I think that, this little island that is 90 miles off the Florida coast that has made the successful revolution of the 20th century, a revolution that 56 years later continues to exist with problems, with failures, with all kinds of things, but there it is, it hasn't been erased. I think that that's an interesting place for people in this country to turn their eyes and their ears and their hearts. I mean, there's also a lot to be gleaned from Cuban culture, Cuban literature, Cuban art, Cuban theater and music. I mean, I think some people in this country are familiar with the Vieja Trova, the old troubadours in Cuba, or the Nueva Trova, the so-called new troubadours like Silvio Rodriguez and Sara Gonzalez and Noel Nicola and Pablo Milanés and so forth. So, I think that there's just so much rich culture in Cuba. And as we're interested in other parts of the world, people here in this country can be very insular. Most people in the United States don't learn a second language, don't believe they have to, just talk a little louder, when you're traveling. But I think that, people of goodwill, people who are curious, who are interested in other cultures, we have one that's really exciting, 90 miles off our shores, and I think now that it's a little easier to get there and relations have been reestablished, there should be a lot of interest in what's going on there.
It's so funny you talk about not learning another language. Because as a child, I did know Spanish, but then as an adult, my brother lived in Puerto Rico. I had a girlfriend down in Puerto Rico. I would go down there all the time. And I could pick it up after a few days down there. But when I went to Spain, I was trying to talk to people in my broken Spanish, and this guy stopped me in a bar and he says, "You're Cuban, right?" And I said, "Sí, yes, I am." And he goes,
"Yeah, that's unmistakable in the ends of words, right?"
I was so proud, I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Your accent is perfect. Your Spanish is terrible, but your accent is perfect."
That's funny, yeah.
I know. But why don't you? We only have a couple of minutes left. Tell us a little bit about this book. The latest book is the one about the Haide Santa Maria, the Cuban revolutionary. She led by.
Right.
Can you give us a quick?
Well, actually, there's a sort of a link between the two books. So I'm glad you brought that up. The Che book has a chapter called Che and Fidel. Che and Haide, in which I talk about their relationship. They were dear friends during the war, after the war, and they were very similar in many ways. They were also extremely dissimilar. Che came from a middle class, upper middle class, somewhat aristocratic, very well-educated family. He was a doctor. Haide came from a family of middle management on a sugar plantation. She only had a sixth grade education. She was the only woman in Cuba to have taken part in every single phase of the Cuban Revolution, from the initial attack on Moncada Barracks in 1953 through the underground, where she was a leader, in the mountains, in the United States, where she bought weaponry from the mafia, and so forth and so on. So she took part in absolutely every phase. When the war ended, to many people's surprise, she was charged with the job of starting a cultural institution called Casa de las Americas, which became and remains today one of the preeminent cultural institutions in the Spanish-speaking world. It's an extraordinary institution in Havana, which has really broken through the cultural blockade, which of course was a part of the whole diplomatic, economic, military blockade. She brought the best art and the best minds of intellectuals throughout the world to Cuba, and she got Cuba art and literature and music and so forth out to the rest of the world. Despite the fact that she had never gone to the university, had never studied art history, she was an amazing woman. She was also a woman who fought demons all her life. Her brother, who was very close to her, and her partner were both tortured to death at Monclova. And those demons never left her. And in 1980, at the age of 57, she committed suicide. Oh. So she is a figure that was always revered in the Cuban Revolution. I mean, people called her Aide, just like they call Che or Fidel. They called her by her first name. They adored her. Even people who weren't revolutionaries adored her. But she has never really received the recognition that I believe she's due because of the fact that she committed suicide, which was a very unpopular and a misunderstood act, especially at that time in history. So she was a friend of mine. She was a great mentor to me. She was someone I deeply admired and admire. And for years and years, I wanted to write about her. I wasn't sure I could. And finally, a couple of years ago, I convinced Duke University Press that I wanted to do a book about her. I went back to Cuba, did the research, and that book just came out last week. So I'm in the midst right now of presenting it in different places. And, just as the Che book, which came out a few years before, also from Duke, has a chapter about Aide, the Aide book has also a chapter about Che. In my mind, they're deeply intertwined, and in terms of their commitment, in terms of their creativity, in terms of their profundity, and so that's my new book. Yes,
I'll have a link to both of these books and a couple of other books, as many as I can fit, on the Opperman Report blogspot.com, and also to the new bookstore that we have on OppermanReport.com. Real quick, though, because you'd mentioned how she was buying weapons from the mafia in the United States. Now, I've had some people on here. We've done a lot of shows about the Bay of Pigs and about the Watergate burglars and JFK assassination, all that kind of stuff. And I've been told by some people who should know that the CIA was actually supporting Castro in the beginning of the revolution. What do you know about that?
I doubt it. I mean, it may have been. They may have supported some aspect, apparently, but I think they definitely didn't support the revolution in the sense of what it would eventually mean for the Cuban people. But some of the stories in my new book about how about Aide's contacts with the mafia are quite amazing. I mean, in those days, women wore these great big circle skirts. I don't know what they'd be called today. They really don't exist today. But she used to hand sew tiny little pockets on the undersides of those skirts, hundreds of them, each one containing one bullet. And that was the way she got some of the ammunition into Cuba. I mean, she had these amazingly creative ways of confronting problems. And so, there are some interesting stories about her and the mafia.
Well, like what else? What else can you tell us?
Oh, she talks about, for example, she never wanted to leave Cuba. She was a very provincial woman, and in spite of the fact that she became close friends of intellectuals and artists all over the world, she understood them, she met them on their terms. But in some ways, she was always very provincial, and she never wanted to leave Cuba. She was always afraid she wouldn't be able to get back during the war. But finally, at one point, Fidel persuaded her that he needed to send someone he trusted completely to buy planes and ammunition and weaponry and so forth. And so reluctantly she went, and I talk about how she left the country, and, I tell the whole story of what that was like. And she does say in the book that, in a quote that I have, that she was never afraid in Cuba. I mean, she had this amazing capacity to change how she looked, to put on 20 pounds, take off 20 pounds, to change her hairstyle. She got in and out of situations without ever being caught in Cuba. And she says that the one time during the war that she was afraid was in a meeting with members of the mafia in the United States, and that she had to escape that meeting with a gun in her hand. She said she never even was armed in Cuba when she would go around. So I think people should read the book, buy the book, and there's many, many such stories in it, and some of them are really quite astonishing. So I don't want to give too much away.
I know. Well, we'll have links to those books, like I said, on the both in the OppermanReport.com and the Opperman Report blog spot in the blog. Ms. Randall, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this today. Your website is margaretrandall.org, and you're going to be October 17th. You'll be speaking at the symposium in UCLA. Do you know what day of the week that is?
I don't remember what day of the week that is, but I know that the 18th, I believe it's the 18th, I'm going to be at Loyola Marymount, also in Southern California, talking about my new book. Just before that, I'm going to be in New York City. In November, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. So people should go on my website, www.margaretrandall.org, and all of those events are listed with their detailed times and places and so forth. And I would love to see people there.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll have a link to that too. margaretrandall.org on the OppermanReport.com website as well. Margaret Randall, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. It's been a great pleasure.
You've made my day today. I'm going to leave this conversation with a much better mood than I went into it. Trust me on that. Thank you so much for all your service to this country and to the struggle. And thank you so much for being an inspiration to all of us, okay?
Well, thank you as well.
And I'll be talking to you soon because I want to get you back.
Good.
Thank you, man.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so there we had it. Margaret Randall, fascinating woman. I loved it. Her book is Che on My Mind, story of Che Guevara from someone who actually met the Che Guevara's family, lived in Cuba, lived in Nicaragua, Mexico, part of the Mexican social activism down there in the 60s. Fascinating woman. I love her. You know what? You guys know me. I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. And just to hear someone who's like a real deal, someone who's lived their life and put themselves out there for years and years and years. On the front lines. I respect that so much. And I'm going to try and get down there with Vic to see one of these, either the symposium or one of the book signings or something like that down in California. We'll try and get over there. Got October, right? Maybe we got a whole month to put together some money to get a car or a ride out there or something. Thank you all so much. Don't forget to support the member section. I was running a special for Labor Day weekend, and then today's my birthday, so I was going to extend it again for my birthday, but everybody who's listening to this is already in the member section. Also, too, we got a lot of big stuff coming up. This weekend, this Friday, September 11th, we're going to be doing a show about FBI setting up terror suspects and FBI stings and that kind of stuff, and how most of these arrests you hear about are all FBI operations. So thank you so much for joining our show. Thank you, Margaret Randall, so much. Che on Our Mind. And Heide Santa Maria, oh boy, where is it? I got it right here. Heide Santa Maria, I don't have the link. Here it is, yeah. Heide Santa Maria, a Cuban revolutionary. She led by transgression. That's a really cool name. So thank you very much for coming on our show, and we'll see you guys. I'm doing a show tomorrow with a guy, really fascinating guy. He's part of the Earth Liberation Front, and he wrote a book about the Mad Bomber. A different one, though. One of the guys became a Weather Underground back in New York City. So we'll be talking to him tomorrow. Good night.